Hi, everybody. Welcome to Getting Started with Hub and Enterprise Sites. My name is Graham Hudgens. I'm on the product team for the Hub and Enterprise Sites. And with me,
Hi, my name is Rob Stauberg, and I'm a software developer on the Hub and Enterprise Sites team.
so we have a good agenda for you. We're going to overview the product, talk through the basics of using both of the applications. We'll build a site and evolve it with some features. And then we'll take a look at some more advanced functionality with regard to matching your site in with your organization's existing web properties. And as always, we'll leave you with lots of resources so that you can reach out to us afterwards if you have more questions. So ArcGIS Enterprise Sites is a capability that allows you to create custom websites and web pages with the target being the non-GIS user. So if you think of the portal as the GIS home base, this is basically embedding that functionality in places on the web that interest non-GIS users, such as in an internal use case like a wiki or things like that within your ArcGIS Enterprise deployment in your network. We have a similar application in ArcGIS Online called ArcGIS Hub. It is a easy to configure cloud platform that lets you collaborate with your community to accomplish information-driven initiatives. The key word here is community. Most people's community are not GIS experts, so very similar mission. Both applications utilize the same underlying website tech, and so we'll be kind of talking about them interchangeably throughout the presentation. ArcGIS Hub is a part of ArcGIS Online, and it comes in two flavors, ArcGIS Hub Basic and ArcGIS Hub Premium. And we'll be focusing mostly around the basic functionality, but highlighting the areas where if you license the premium functionality, you get extra features, layout options, and the ability to actually do some true two-way engagement with people outside of your organization. Similar, Enterprise Sites is an aspect of your enterprise portal. It's there by default. You don't have to install it. It should just be there after 10.6.1 of the enterprise solution. And it lets us do sites and pages and various things within there. So there is a little bit of a difference. So I get this question sometimes, when should I use Hub and when should I use Enterprise Sites? Hub does have more features than Enterprise due to the nature of its deployment. So if you can use ArcGIS Online, I definitely recommend that you use ArcGIS Hub because it has more features and functionality. It also has a couple of webby features, meaning it's optimized to run on the web. We put it behind what's called a content distribution network, which is a caching layer that makes it run better. And we take extra steps to make sure your Google page ranking is high. Finally, we have 3 subsystems that Enterprise does not. Hub can support multiple custom domains in the ArcGIS Online platform. So you can run like at mysite.org as well as a different domain. We have an extended download system and caching over the platform, so we can make more data formats available on top of your feature services and data sources. And the search experience is a little bit improved. So kind of reiterating the point, if you can use the online option, then that's the right one to choose. But a lot of you are in the boat where you want to deploy privately in your own networks, which can't be online. And that's when Enterprise Sites really shines. So if you can't use a SaaS product, you can deploy it yourself. You get full control of the enterprise portal, web adapter, and all that good stuff. So yeah, so let's start with the basics. My recommendation here is that you build something with absolutely no plan so that you get a feel for things. So I recommend this by making your first site. And to do that, you'll need to be a creator user with essential apps. In Enterprise or Hub, you'll see us here in the Hub sites and pages or Enterprise sites and pages. You need to be, I call it publisher-ish. You don't need to be a full publisher to make content, but you need these 5 user privileges to be able to use the app at a minimum. And if you have extra privileges, these 2 specifically, a couple of other features of the Hub and Enterprise sites will open up to you. The top one allows you to bring others in to edit. So if I wanted Rob, for example, to edit my site, and I had this privilege, I could then basically add him to my site's team, and he'll be able to edit. And the other is an administrative power to push people into groups. It's really nice because if I wanted to share this site to Rob, he would have to accept it if I don't have this privilege. So it's kind of nice to be able to push a user into a group and give them a link so they don't have to go about accepting it. But not a deal breaker if you don't have either of these privileges. You're able to use the app just fine. If you're looking for finding the app, it's available in what we call the app launcher in the home application or your portal. That's this little drawer at the upper right-hand side, and you can click Hub or Sites depending on where you are. And if you're in online, you have the Create menu and you have the Sites option. That's coming to Enterprise in a later release, but isn't available currently. So when you click those App Launcher Hub, you will land on what we call the Overview, which is a place that shows you all of the sites and content you've created in the application, kind of like the name. So here you'll be able to see your recents, and you'll be able to launch new sites via the big blue New button. And again, depending on which features you've licensed, so if you're in Hub Premium, you might have additional cards like this community card and this community dashboard, as you may be signing users up to your sites to do things. So if you have that feature, you'll have a little bit more in Overview. And here's what it looks like in Enterprise. So let's take a look at the application. And let's just screw around with it a little bit to get a feel for where everything is. So yeah, here I am in here, and I can come to Hub, and you'll see I get bounced out to this Overview. And right here, you can see I can return to the sites I've been working on, or I can come back and look at a list of everything that I have. But today I'm just going to click New, and I'm going to make my first site. If you come into this screen, and you can type in a name and click Go, and it'll make you kind of a default one. If you have Hub Premium, you'll have this Browse Templates button, and you can browse various other layout choices made available by a content team here at Esri. So these are some good starting points. A lot of people, if you're starting out for the first time, like to build a generic open data site. So you can pick this one and give it a name. And once I do that, I will end up in the site itself. So you'll get kind of a copy of that template, and you'll be able to see some of the layout choices that we've made. And we'll be looking at the layout in more detail here in a little bit. The primary way to get around your site is this navigation menu here. So just to give you a quick overview of each of these sections, we have the site itself, which is the layout of the home page. So this is the kind of primary way people experience this website. We have the dashboard. Dashboard's useful to get a sneak peek of how many times your site's been viewed. Since I just created it, it's obviously at 0 right now. We have teams. If I wanted to involve Rob and I had that extra user privilege, I can pull him into my core team, and he will be able to edit the content of this site. I have events. Here in events, I can make events that hang off the site. This is only available in Hub Premium because it's meant to try to engage your users, but I can make a sample event, sample description. I can spell description wrong, which is always fun. And come down, pick where it's going to happen. Let's say I'm going to pick address at random and pick when it's going to happen. So it's going to happen later today. And I can publish it maybe to my org or publicly, whatever I want to do. So it kind of gives you an idea of, I can hang events underneath my site, and I can bounce back into that edit mode and edit and change it if I'd like to. Gives you a little list about events. We also have feedback, a very similar user experience for creating surveys. We'll look at that in a little bit. And if you have Hub Premium, as you sign people up to your site and as they click follow, they will show up here. You can come back here for messaging them and doing things of that nature. Finally, we have the content library and the group manager. These are both meant to get content onto your site. And these have a sort of mirror relationship with the site's search page. I'll show you kind of that side. So here's where I can manage the content that shows up on my site. And if I X out, I'll see that every site has the equivalent of a search page underneath it. So since we haven't set this up yet, my site doesn't have anything on it. If I was to search my site for data, I'm going to end up with nothing. So if I wanted to manage that, I can click this edit pencil, and I can come here and work with the content that's on the site. Finally, if you're looking to get around, you can come back to these menus. So if you make multiple sites in the application, you can go back to your list of sites or initiatives here, and you'll be able to see them all and jump into another one if you want to switch between which sites you're working on. So this is our sort of local menu, and this is our global menu. One other thing to note is that there's this little page guy right here on the site layout. So sites can support multiple pages. If I come in here, I can basically create another layout, give it a name that's probably going to be better than that. And you'll notice that I kept my header, but I have a wholly different section here that I can work with and lay out. So pages give us this ability to have lots of layouts on a website, a multi-page website. And at any time, if I want to get back to something in my site, I can come to this menu, or I can use these breadcrumbs to kind of find my way back. So go back up to the site and get around. And we'll be looking at this in a lot more detail, but I just wanted to kind of walk you through the layout just to get you oriented. So when I made that site, what happened in the app behind the scenes? In Portal or online, you know, as with everything is items and groups. So when I made a site, if I have Hub Premium, you'll notice I get a couple of extra things, but fundamentally a site is an item. It's either a Hub site application or a site application, depending on enterprise or online, but the exact same concept. I also get some groups behind the scenes. The content group is what's powering those search results and the content library that we were just looking at. And the core team powers the ability to do shared editing of content, like the site itself. So depending on your privileges, you might not have some of these groups when you create it, but if you're a fully privileged user, you're gonna get all of these items. If you're premium, you get a group that houses your followers. This is so that as users come to your site, I can click follow, this little star, and I will show up as a follower. And this will allow you to figure out who of your community is interested in this site and maybe send them updates as you keep your content updated. And you also get an extra item. When I make a page, I get an item for that too. And when I make an event, we make a group for that to house the attendees of the event, similar to followers. So if you're using the application and you go into online or you go into your enterprise portal, you'll notice it makes a lot of stuff behind the scenes. That's just gonna be automatic. I definitely recommend you do not mess with this stuff unless you know what you're doing. It's best to manage all of these items in the Hub application or the enterprise sites application than it would be to do it directly. Okay, so now you're hopefully more familiar with the sites process and building your first. Now you need to do the harder job of actually figuring out what you're gonna build. And there's a saying in scuba diving, which is plan the dive and dive the plan. I definitely subscribe to this mantra. I think a planning exercise is a really good thing to do with stakeholders. Pick your first project so that you can all share a success and you know what success looks like ahead of time. When recommending what to start with, really you can start with anything you want as long as it's manageable and scoped correctly and you have enough time to invest in it. So if you want to just play with Hub or enterprise sites on the side, I recommend picking something like a private data sharing site or an open data site for your public data, which is, I think, what we're going to try to do first, because they don't take as much time. You can set them up, configure the content, share it to the right audience, and then you can kind of set it and forget it, and it'll just stay up to date as data is shared to the appropriate groups, and it'll kind of just live out there. You can also make project-related sites. If you have a specific goal or urban development or you name it, you can feature a site around the GIS content that's related there. The key there is that you should be coming back to that site periodically to keep it updated as the project moves forward. And that gets even bigger if you start doing things like programs, like really broad projects that span multiple months or years. And especially if you're trying to engage with your public and get them engaged with you digitally, where they're contributing information and you're contributing content, that will take more of your time. So if you have a larger percentage of your day to give to building that content, then no problem. But if you're trying to start somewhere easy that you can kind of get something going and get a quick win, I recommend more of these sorts of data sharing use cases. So with that in mind, why don't we do that? We'll focus on building one of those sites and take a look behind the scenes as to what that takes to do. And this is obviously multiple ways to get at the same objective. The way I'm gonna go about this is just a personal preference, but you can do this in any order that you want. So I'm a really content-y person. I like to think about building all the Legos first and then using them to make something pretty afterwards. So I'm gonna come back to the content library. And what I wanna do is I wanna share public data from my organization to the anonymous public. And I wanna have a website that is a part of my GIS that people can stumble on through Google and then get at some of my data and leave and never really realize it was part of a GIS. So with that intent in mind, I want to add some content that already exists in ArcGIS Online to my site. So here in the Add Existing Content window, I can search all of the content in my organization that's related to app, data, documents, pretty much anything. What I'm going to add is a couple of layers from the place I live, Montgomery County. that are public. Since I'm doing a public sharing site, I want to make sure that these are the right ones. So you might have to check with some of your other colleagues to make sure you're sharing the right information. But there's a bunch of data housekeeping stuff you should be doing to make sure that the data is really intuitive. That's going to be covered in another talk about deep customizing your sites. So if you're interested in that, search for that one and watch a little bit of that to get some best practices about getting these data ready for use on a site. But I'm going to assume it's already in really good shape, and these are the ones I want, and I'm going to add. And behind the scenes, what this is doing is this is adding them to that site's catalog. So I have my page and I have my 3 pieces of data. And if I jump out really quick, I can see that I now have data on my site. And when I click on them, I can see this sort of item details light page that is automatically generated. If I don't like anything about this and I want to change some key information, the hub has kind of a metadata light editing experience now. And I can use that, or I can jump back to my content library and continue to upload more and more things. So you can kind of see the relationship. The content library and your site search are kind of completely joined at the hip. So let's assume that that's the most content I want to add. The other thing I can do here is decide what I want to run the top. So depending on the type of content I have, maybe I don't have events and I don't want that to show up. And maybe I don't think of it as data, but I want to call it something like data sets. I can basically customize these little tabs at the top, save those changes, and it gives users an ability to filter the data down by various things. And just like with before, if I change that, I can change it here, and all has the same relationship. So let's move into the more fun part, I would say, of building a site. And it's really about making a really killer layout that catches people's attention and gets them to the right purpose of the site. So we used this template, which is really nice, this open data template. This is really emphasizing search, but you're going to want to think about the number one thing you want people to do with your site and try to make sure that that is, so to speak, above the fold, high on the website, very clear, because you really only have a few seconds of somebody's eyeballs before they either engage with the site or move on to something else. So in this case, I think the search bar is appropriate. Now, when laying these sites out, it's a WYSIWYG editor. What you see is what you get. So you don't have to jump between previewing and editing. You can just use it. And you'll notice as I move my cursor around, I'm getting these little controls. All the sites are laid out in their own rows. And you can see the rows on the right-hand side as I move my control up and down. And within the rows are these cards. And there's a lot of different card choices. So on the left-hand side of the site, to choose the cards that we want, I can use the layout option, and I have all of these draggable cards. So if I wanted another row beneath this green block, I can add a row. And there's some settings here that are really useful for changing, maybe making a row have a different color from the overall theme, which we'll talk more about theming in a little bit. I can also add cards by just dragging them into the rows, and then I can configure them. So this card, for example, is one of our ways of embedding content. So if I really wanted everybody to experience a specific app or map, I could pick it and embed it, and it will basically be there live for me. So with the layout options, what we really want to do is come up with the right content for our site's purpose. So since my site is going to be about featuring lots of items and lots of data, I'm going to focus more on the search capabilities and these category cards. Search and categories are really useful because if you're building a site with potentially thousands of pieces of item, you might have a lot of different ways to subdivide that data. So the category card lets me pick tags or categories or groups that already subdivide the data that's on my site. So if I had all of my data here, let's go look at what tags I used. I used districts on this data set. So maybe I want to have just all of my districts and boundaries. I can basically configure this to be a district category. I can pick an icon for it that represents districts. Sure, we'll use the column building. And then this will search the site just for data tagged with districts. These are some of our most engaging pieces of website layouts because they basically tell the user what the answer is to what is on the site. So if I say, and I should probably rename this to say districts or boundaries, If I put a card like this, I can click on it and basically be taken to just the data that is tagged with that tag. So it's a really good way to use probably the organizational systems you already have within your ArcGIS online or portal experience, but just surfacing them in a nice, friendly way to show people how to traverse potentially thousands of items. The other card I recommend is already here for me, but it's called the search card. And if you're looking for it, it's down here in the list. And this is exactly what it sounds like. It is just a bar that searches what's on the site. What's nice about our search is it has autocomplete, and it also surfaces those little data set versus app facets that we configured on the content library. So if you're the kind of person who knows exactly what they're looking for, they can use that to find the site content. And as far as public sharing of data, above the fold, this is going to do the job. Search, and here's the answer. Perfect. Below the fold, we can do some more fancier things to feature some of our work. If you have Hub Premium, inviting people to follow will collect a list of actual email addresses and identities of people so that you can tell them when your site has content updates or invite them to an event or do things like that. So that's a good idea if you have Hub Premium. If you have a number of apps or maps or you want to feature certain content, you can use a gallery card, and you can configure it either to pull all the content from your site using a group in dynamic mode, or you can use manual mode to pick literally some specific things that are that you want to share. So maybe I just want to share these 3 items. When I do that, they will just pop in. Really cool thing about the gallery is that it will reflect the user's login, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But this is a good below the fold card, because if somebody's interested in the topic and is looking for a different way of experiencing it, they can come here and they can basically work with it there. Now, one thing I do recommend, no matter what your site is, I think you should not just focus on data. There's such a wealth of capability in the ArcGIS platform. I recommend for people to come back to the content library once you have all your data, once you have your primary objectives scaffolded out, and add some more additional ways to experience the same content. So what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to click New, and I want to make another app. And we recommend some of the other apps that are in the platform. I recommend really almost every site should have a story map. You can use Experience Builder or Web App Builder to make an immersive, interactive web experience around a data set. This is the kind of stuff that I would say attracts other types of thinkers, not just the data thinkers. So, for example, my father is an English major, and he is not really at all interested in dashboards or data sets. But if you give him a story map, he will read it like a news article because of the way his literary background. So having lots of different ways to experience the same content put on your site is a good idea. So you can come here, you can make a story map, for example, like the one I just made. And if you really like what you did, you can feature it somewhere in your layout. So maybe I want to use that gallery card. And now instead of picking the random apps, I'm going to pick, that story map that I just created. Great. So this is a good way of, kind of configuring your content to be exciting. And so I definitely recommend making apps and maps to back up your great data and feature it all on your site so that people can choose their own adventure. They don't have to experience just the one way. So you can get at different people who come from different kind of walks of life. Now, let me say at this point, maybe I want to get a review from a communications person or somebody who's got a marketing background or brand background or some of those types of things. I'm going to pop over to Teams and come into the core team. And this is where I can add others who can edit my site. So if I go to add members, what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for Rob, and he's in there. So hi, Rob, welcome to the team. Now, because I had that ability to push Rob into the group, he's just there and he's ready to go. And I can even use Teams here. If you're in ArcGIS Online, not in Enterprise, unfortunately, I can message Rob and say, site is, ready for review. And maybe I can copy, let's not copy the whole URL, but we'll copy, check it out. And Rob's going to get an email from me via the platform, and he can come in, log in, and edit the site. So let's pretend that we did that, and we released this site, and we reviewed it with our stakeholders, and they're like, yeah, this is great. So they love the fact that you can jump into data sets, and it's so seamless, and maybe that we'll talk more about the header here when Rob shows us how to customize it, but they love the simplicity of the web experience and the fact that it works really great on a mobile phone. I can basically just explore the data on the go, find it from Google, all that good stuff. But in my feedback with them, they say, you know what? I want a similar sharing experience, my stakeholders are like, for private data for one of my departments. And then they also give me the requirement that they don't want to make a separate site. People have come to love this site as kind of the center for the non-GIS like space of your data, and even employees are using it a lot, but they want to add more content to it that's privately shared. So to do that, I'm going to advance my site to be what I call a hybrid public site with public data on it, but also have some areas of the site that are private and with private data on it. So imagining I want to add the police data now to this, but the police data isn't something I can share publicly because it's sensitive. If I wanted to do that, we have a lot of options to leverage the ArcGIS sharing model to build these sorts of hybrid sites. So first off, I might ask my stakeholders, can they just use this one layout and just access the data on the search page, or do they need their own kind of space? Maybe they need their own space. So this is a great use of pages. I can come in here and I can make a police, sharing area, a terrible name. And when I make a page, it's initially shared privately. So even if I come back to my site and I say, great, my site's public, like that's great, my site's public, but if I go over to my police sharing area, that will still be private. So already this is a private space for the police information. Maybe we want to have like sensitive data rules here, and maybe want to feature a certain dashboard or something like that. So I can still use all of these cards, like that app card to embed an app. I can use any of these other cards. Maybe I want to embed a specific map or scene, and pick, again, a private map. Maybe I want to only pick something that's just shared to my organization. What's always fun about demo orgs is I never know what I'm going to get. But great, I got a map on my site with one data point on it, and it's privately shared, and I can save that. Now, how will the police people find this in my site if they come to this site already today? One area of your site that's really useful for this sort of dynamic content being hidden in plain sight is your header. So we'll talk way more about the header, but one of the great options in the standard or prominent modes is the menu bar. And if I add a link to existing content from my current site or initiative, I can basically say, okay, let's add that page, and I'm going to add the police sharing page, and let's add that, just that for now. So now I get this extra tab. And what's so cool about all of this is that if you've already set up all your users in your enterprise portal or ArcGIS Online, then the people who can see it will be able to see it. Wow, that's great. And the people who can't, if you're just the anonymous public, will get nothing. So you can build this sort of blended web experience that lets you do all that really, really effortlessly. So I'm going to log back in here and edit this again. Okay, so one other thing is, how do you share the information to your stakeholders? If you have Hub Premium, you can do this without visiting the home application, but effectively what we need is called a team. We call these supporting teams. So I'm going to call it the police department. All this is doing behind the scenes is making a group, so you can feel free to do this in Portal or your home application in ArcGIS Online. So here I can add people from my organization, like my boss Andrew here, and I can also flip over to the content and decide what content from the current initiative I want them to have access to. So I think I want to just give them the police sharing data and maybe a map or something. So I can pick the content that is going in that group and share it to them. This kind of streamlines that sharing that you would have to do otherwise in ArcGIS Online. But if you ever want to do more advanced things, you can always pop out into the portal or home application and manage groups and sharing directly here. This is a much more powerful application for doing those sorts of activities. So there's a couple of those features exposed in the app, but you can leave and do more advanced sharing over there. So yeah, at this point, we've made a hybrid public-private site, and we walked through it all. So now we want to see about how do I make my site preserved in my ecosystem of web properties. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Rob.
Okay, thanks, Graham. So similar to what Graham was talking about earlier, this idea of being able to share your GIS without your users ever realizing that they're in your GIS or have left your web ecosystem. Today, I'm going to be talking about like how you might preserve a standard user experience across a wide variety of pages, whether it be your own app or an ArcGIS Hub or enterprise site application. And the example that I've chosen to illustrate this today is Mashable. For those of you who might not be familiar, Mashable is an online tech news resource. And the reason why I picked it is because it has a very obvious brand that is preserved across all of its pages. And it has this great header at the top here that we can talk about in terms of preserving your user experience across the app. So let's take the persona of a person who might be an employee of Mashable, who is tasked with sharing their GIS with the consumers or users or stakeholders of Mashable in a way that could be useful through ArcGIS Hub or enterprise sites. And so it'd be great if they could have all of the awesome tools that ArcGIS Online or your portal provides without having to worry about implementing any of that in the Mashable website. And so to start illustrating this, we are just going to start by looking at a out-of-the-box ArcGIS Hub or enterprise site that I've created here. I haven't changed anything about the site other than the fact that I added some web maps that might illustrate something that might be of interest to Mashable's users. So for example, these are web maps that just have to do with median salaries of tech companies in Silicon Valley and DC. But everything else is just as you would get out of the box with the site that you create in Hub or enterprise sites. And so if we take a look at Mashable's header, it's always a good idea to kind of understand what you need to build and kind of what your goal is. And so for this presentation, we're going to see if we can implement this kind of header theme up here with this light blue theming in a way that if I'm going between Mashable and Hub site, I might not realize that I'm necessarily leaving the Mashable ecosystem. And so we've got this header, it's got some hover effects, it's got some drop downs, which we're going to talk about. We've got some social icons over here and a login icon. Additionally, there's some other small things which are probably important to preserving one user experience, like a favicon or a title. And so we're just going to start out in Hub by looking at the header that comes out of the box. And so this standard header that comes out of the box here, we can see it already looks pretty good in terms of just, it's got the text we need and it's pretty low profile like we would expect. But let's go ahead and edit some things. We can change the title to be Mashable. And then another thing we can do is use the theme editor to actually change the colors or the fonts of the text and other elements in the header to look like kind of what we're going here. And so let's just start by seeing if we can transfer this light blue theme over to ArcGIS Hub. So there are a variety of ways to start by to inspect web elements and kind of get the styles that you want. I prefer to actually kind of get down and dirty with the Chrome inspector. And so if we get down into here, we can actually get the actual hex value of the background color here. Another thing that you can do if you're maybe not as tech savvy is you can get any kind of like easy dropper tool. They have desktop and Chrome extension applications that are really great that you can use to grab colors like this. But sometimes they're not exactly accurate. So see, it's calculated this hex value, but that's different from what's actually defined in the CSS here. So we're going to go ahead and go back here into the theme editor. And we're going to change the background of both the global nav, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and the header. And so here we go. We've got a header that's the same color down to the exact text as what we've got here. We've also got some other great features that come with the out-of-the-box Hub header, like social icons. So Mashable's got this Facebook and this Twitter icon. And so we can actually enable a Facebook and a Twitter icon just like this and paste our social links in here as a way to link out to those pages, which is really great. One last thing we can do is similar to what Graham was mentioning earlier, you can actually add menu links right here. Graham was linking to existing content, but I'm going to show you how we might want to link to other pages. So to preserve this header, let's make a link to video. So here's the link here to the Mashable videos page. And so I'll just say add link to an external page. I'll call it video. And I'll add the link destination. You can see it pops up here. And just like Graham was explaining with the WYSIWYG, I'll save and I'll view it. And it looks pretty good. But one thing that is pretty noticeable is this header at the top here. It's this header on top of the header that you just built. It's called Global Nav, and I'll let Graham talk for a second about kind of some of the features that it brings to the table.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, Global Nav is really useful for kind of the Esri supplied functionality of your user identity We have a global search bar you can see there that has that autocomplete in there. We also surface things like notifications. And we have this hamburger over on the far left. I'm making him jump to hoops right now. The nice thing about this is it's a place for us to park functionality that is consistent across all of your different hub sites. And we do prefer that you leave it on, but as Rob's going to outline, if you have stakeholders who need, it to be exact, it is an option that you can disable, just not one that we recommend disabling.
Yeah, exactly. So let's say your stakeholders are really, really insistent that we really follow this low profile header up here. And so we can just go back into the edit mode of the site, pop into settings, and check out the interactions accordion. And you can see right here, we can disable global nav. And when we save that and view it, sometimes you need to do a hard refresh. But once you do a hard refresh, you'll see that the global nav is gone, and we've kind of gotten that low profile that we kind of want in our header that we're building. But let's say that you bring this back to your stakeholders and you explain, I've built this header, it uses Hub's custom or built out of the box header functionality, but it's still not good enough for them. They really are insistent that we really follow the design to the T. Like they want the exact same spacing, they want this hover effect, they want to be able to have this expanded menu drop down. And basically it's just at this point, we're kind of pushing the boundaries of the limits of what the out of the box Hub header can provide. Kind of looking at building our own thing. And so what we're going to be doing now is this idea of building our own custom header, specifically this DOM element right here. It's really easy to do this. In Hub, I just need to go into the header pane, I pick custom, and you can see we provide an out-of-the-box DOM structure for a really simple custom header. For this presentation, we're not going to use that, but we have these two panes over here for HTML and CSS, and it provides a full rich text editor with syntax highlighting. For enterprise sites users, that'll be coming in 10.8. We're really excited about that. But for now, we're just going to clear this all out, which is super easy. The WYSIWYG is really great for editing this HTML and CSS. You can see that the header is gone. And now we have to think about how we're actually going to build this in Hub. And basically, there are two approaches that we can take. We can copy and paste the DOM from source, or we can build it from scratch. So for those of you who might be familiar with the Chrome web inspector or any other web inspector of whatever browser you use, you can always just go in and copy DOM like this. And then when you paste it, it'll paste all of it in. And I can kind of start by straight up copying DOM from the source and then going from there. And honestly, while this might seem like a good idea, because you might think to yourself, oh, if I copy DOM, I'm actually avoiding work. This actually in practice isn't a great idea. Just looking at the code itself, we can see that this is a lot of DOM structure, and it's way more than should be necessary for just building a simple header. We can also see there's a whole lot of other info in here that the Hub application or the enterprise sites application just doesn't need. So we have these weird attribute tags that are definitely not normal for HTML, and it's probably that these are offshoots or resulting from whatever front-end framework that Mashable uses. But for our purposes, it's something that means nothing to Hub, and it's just something that we don't need. Some other reasons for not copying are, even if you can copy the DOM structure exactly, it's almost impossible to copy CSS exactly. There's some Chrome extensions out there that I've played with that can let you do this. But the fact of the matter is, these CSS rules that are currently being applied. And as we can see on the Mashable website, there's a variety of CSS rules that are being applied as the browser goes from mobile to desktop to medium screen size and so on and so forth. And you're just going to miss out on these rules by just trying to copy and paste them. And then the biggest reason is that wherever you're trying to build a header from out of your source might be using a CSS system that's completely different from Hub. In Hub, we use Bootstrap 3. And while Bootstrap is a pretty ubiquitous CSS framework, not necessarily all websites use it. And so you might end up copying over DOM or CSS classes that just have classes or expect certain conditions to be met that just won't exist in Hub. And so I'm going to show you, I'm going to go ahead and go down the path of building a Hub header from scratch. I'm going to show you how we're going to leverage Bootstrap and Flexbox for this. When I did this myself, it took approximately 2.5 hours. So it's really not that bad of an investment in terms of like development time. And you'll see that it's definitely worth it in terms of simplicity. So I'm just going to start out with some really easy and simple DOM that I've scaffolded. We literally just have a div with an unordered list and an li in it. We're going to start out with this logo. This logo has an anchor tag that links out to Mashable and 2 images. Now, one important thing that I really want to speak on is when you look at the Mashable logo, it has this anchor tag with a relative href to just slash. And in fact, all of these links here up in the Mashable header are all relative URLs. So when copying them over to Hub, if we just had a slash here instead of mashable.com, none of those links would work, since Hub is, or enterprise sites, your site would be a separate site from Mashable. And so it's important to make sure that you're copying over fully formed URLs that will actually link out to where you want to go. So we do this and we can see that we've got the DOM structure and everything copied over properly. And it's also great because it's even pointing at the same source images as the existing Mashable header is. But obviously we need some CSS rules here to like clean this up. So I'm going to paste over some CSS that I've built, and I'm just going to briefly explain it. Most of this is going to be scaffolding in terms of properly spacing things or putting in correct colors. It's pretty easy to do this. Honestly, most of it I was able to just do on my own without really having to look into CSS and Mashable too much. One of the more interesting rules that I think is important to understand is this concept of this hover effect. There's actually two images here. One is a light image and one is a dark image, and they have two different classes, and they hide or show based on whether you're hovering over the logo with your cursor. And so as you can see here in the CSS class, the image with the dark class is hidden by default, but on hover, the dark class image shows and the light class image hides. And so you'll see when we hit apply to hit this custom CSS, we get the exact same hovering effect that we see here in the Mashable header. The WYSIWYG, again, is really great. There's really no reason for me to toggle between the view and the edit states because it just works. And so that's pretty great in terms of getting a good start towards what we're looking for in the Mashable header. So the next thing I want to talk about is these links right here. The first link right here, video, is just a simple link. It has no drop downs, and you click it and it just takes you to an href. So it's going to be super, super easy to emulate this on Hub. Again, here's some DOM, really, really simple DOM. It's literally just going to be a li with an anchor tag in it. Again, I've got a fully formed URL. I hit apply, it's popped up here, but it needs some styling. So we're going to copy over some styling that I've written for it. And we're going to look at this for just a second. So you can see most of this, again, is just going to be styling to properly center things. I'm going to explain Flexbox in a little bit and why it's so great for centering. Some colors that we're going to apply when we hover over the link with our cursor, just some basic other styling attributes. But one thing I really want to talk about is this font. So when looking at the HTML or the DOM that's in Mashable, when you look at this anchor tag here, you can see that it comes with the font of Proxima Nova Regular. And that is something that I saw and copied over into the CSS that we put into Hub. However, in CSS and in HTML, there's no way to reference non-regular fonts unless you actually have imported the font file from an HTML file or from a URL or some other file that you might have somewhere else. And so in this case, Proxima Nova Regular is a font that Mashable has actually purchased. It's not one that's available for free. But I'm going to show you how, because theoretically, if you were on the Mashable team, you'd have access to this font. I'm going to show you how you would apply a custom font to the text in your header so that we could be able to transfer our fonts over from our source site. So I'm going to hit apply, and you can see that the link itself already looks pretty good. Another great thing about the WYSIWYG editor is we disable all links in edit mode, so there's no worry of accidentally clicking anything and losing any of the changes you made. But I'm going to go over here to Google Fonts. You can find it really easily at fonts.google.com. And I'm just going to look for a font that we might want to pick for our headers. Rubik looks pretty good, so I'm going to go ahead and hit plus. It's going to add it to my cart. And when I do this, Google Fonts will actually go ahead and build a CSS import or a link attribute that contains our font with it. For the purposes of Hub, you don't actually need this. All you need is a link to the actual font. And so when I go back into the theme editor, which we used earlier to style the color of the header, I'm going to go down here into fonts, and you can see that you can set a font for the text on the page and a separate font for just the text in the heading. Obviously, in this case, we're just looking to style the heading, so I'm going to go here. I'll paste in the URL to the font that I want, make sure that it's all fully formatted correctly. I'll type in the name of the font, and once we validated that that's all good, we'll hit preview. You can see right there, it might be harder to see on your screen, but the font did indeed change, and we're seeing a live preview of the font. And once we hit apply, that font has now been applied to the style sheet that's being put into the page. One last thing that we have to do is for this text to display in the font that we want, we do need to fix the CSS rule since we are overriding it in our CSS, custom CSS. So down here in Proxima Nova Regular, I'll change this to Rubik. I'll hit apply, and you can see that the font has now applied. I'll hit save, And let's just check out the live preview really quick. Looks good. And if I go back to Mashable site, you can see I'm going to go ahead and toggle between them. And you can see we're already looking pretty good, even in terms of spacing. It's hard to distinguish between both of them. And so that's how you would just add a simple link and put style that link with the font and text that you might want. The next thing I'm going to show you is how to make a Bootstrap dropdown menu, which is a really, really important concept for any header, and is really a strength of the Bootstrap CSS grid system. One of the best documentations that there is on this is the Bootstrap documentation itself, which you can really easily find by just Googling Bootstrap dropdown. And it's got a really great documentation for all the kind of dropdowns that Bootstrap offers. And so let's go ahead and paste in this HTML that I've built. It's another LI, excuse me, except it's going to have a little bit different, a little bit of a different structure than what we've been pasting in before. If I inspect this, I'm actually going to show you how Bootstrap styles the DOM tags to show and hide dropdown menus when you click them. You can see when I click this button here, an open class or a show class is automatically applied to the parent div that encloses the button and its dropdown. And it's really super easy to do this. The only thing you need to remember to do is add a data toggle equals dropdown to whatever anchor tag or button element is supposed to toggle your dropdown. It's also a good idea to add some area attributes as well. Generally, you want to start out with area has pop-up equals true and area expanded equals false, and Bootstrap will totally handle changing all of those dynamically for you. And you can see them change down here in the DOM. Right here, you can see that just went to false, and if I click it again, it goes to true. And that's great for screen readers and making sure that your dropdowns are accessible. When we look at Mashable's dropdowns, we can actually see that these are being triggered by hover, not by click. And it's generally agreed upon among the web development community that in terms of best practices for accessibility in screen readers, it's best to toggle dropdowns with a click and not a hover, just for screen readers and for mobile optimizations. So that's what I'm going to do here today. So this LI that I pasted in, we have our anchor tag for entertainment, and that's going to be the anchor tag that's going to toggle the dropdown. And then we also have this simple div here called dropdown menu. It's a good idea to use an area labeled by with an ID to provide a semantic link between the toggle and the dropdown menu itself for screen readers. And I also have a class here, and I'm going to, in a minute, put in some CSS styles that will show and hide this div depending on whether or not the open class is applied to this LI. So when I hit apply, entertainment is here, but it's obviously doesn't have the dropdown yet. It's just not styled properly. So I'm going to come in and grab this CSS, paste it in the bottom here. Basically what this does is it is going to apply certain colors based on whether or not the dropdown is showing or not. But most importantly, it is going to apply a display of flex when the dropdown menu is open versus a default display of none so that the dropdown menu shows. When I hit apply, you'll see we have this really basic dropdown menu, and it works in the WYSIWYG editor, which is really great. And so now we've scaffolded a basic accessible Bootstrap dropdown. One more thing I want to touch on, this little caret here, it might seem daunting at first to try to put in shapes like this in an HTML custom header. You might think to yourself that you need to find an SVG and put that in or something like that. But there's actually a really number of great ways to do cool things with CSS and HTML. I always highly recommend trying to find solutions with just pure HTML and CSS before trying to consult crazy or complicated things like frameworks or JavaScript. And so I found this really great CSS trick called CSS Triangle, which just provided me with some styles for making a basic triangle. And you can see I made a class called caret down, which applies the styles from the CSS trick and then applies them to the DOM here. And so now I've got this great dropdown menu. So we have a dropdown menu, we scaffolded it, but obviously the dropdown menu here in the Bootstrap dropdown is a little more complicated. We have these links here on the side that are arranged vertically, and we have this row of posts that seem to contain dynamic content. And so I'm going to show how we're going to build something like that in a simple sense. So let me just paste in this updated HTML that's going to contain the items that we want. And let me fix the formatting here really quick. Formatting is still a little messed up, but hopefully that's readable. You can see we have a parent div, or it's parent UL that is going to, or excuse me, we have a parent div, the dropdown menu that's going to contain two ULs, and that's going to be our links and our posts. And this is right here where I'm going to talk about the power of Flexbox. So normally using Bootstrap or pretty much any other kind of like basic manual CSS, it would be a real big pain to style this all in a way so that we could have two children divs here, one with content arranged vertically, one with content arranged horizontally. But Flexbox is really powerful because it just lets us do all of this with a couple of CSS rules. So when we look at this dropdown, we can think of the dropdown as being one parent div with two children divs. The child divs is this slightly darker blue box here with links, and this slightly lighter box here with posts. And so we'll have a parent div with the flex direction of row, and that's going to tell the child divs to arrange themselves horizontally. The first child div will have a flex direction of column, and that gives us this vertical stacking of links. And the second child div will have a flex direction of row, which will give us this horizontal row of links. And so after I apply this, it's going to look pretty wonky, but then I'm going to go and grab my CSS, which applies the Flexbox styles that I just described. And you'll see here that the parent drop-down menu class has a flex direction of row like I described, and then the two child divs, which are drop-down links and drop-down content, have flex direction of row. So drop-down links here has a flex direction of column, and then the subnev posts are going to have a flex direction of row. And you can see now that the subnev looks pretty great in terms of comparing it with what is on Mashable. We've got our links arranged here in a nice column, and we have our subnev posts that are arranged in a row. One thing that's good to keep in mind is that flex direction row is actually the default. So for this child div here, I actually didn't need to define a flex direction on it. And so now we've got a great out-of-the-box Bootstrap menu that looks pretty similar to what Mashable has here in terms of a drop-down menu. And so just continuing on, now that we've done the hard work of like putting in a basic link in a drop-down menu, all you really need to do is just kind of copy and paste and continue to scaffold the DOM and the CSS that you want. So I've just got a couple more LIs I'm going to put in here that are going to add a couple more links. So I've got all these links for the different pages that Mashable has. All the CSS is already there. And because of that, there's no need to do any more work to generate CSS to get everything looking properly. So if we go to view, we can see, obviously, there are some differences between our hub header that we built in ArcGIS Hub versus the header that we have in Mashable. But for the most part, they really look pretty much the same, which is really kind of getting us to that goal of having one unified user experience across all your sites. Further things that we could do to push this, it's very easy to add additional links like to the profile page at the end. You can add your own SVGs, and you might have access to the SVGs that are on the page you're trying to copy from, in which case it's really easy just to add those into the HTML editor and then have them link out to other places. But one thing that is important to talk about is when we look at more complicated elements like the search bar or maybe these links here, a lot of these things have a lot of backend JavaScript behind them that make them work. So, the search might be simple. It might just be a URL with some query params on it. But if it triggers a JavaScript action, there's really no way to emulate that in a custom header and hub. And the reason for that is we just don't allow custom JavaScript to be injected into the application for performance and security reasons. So anyway, continuing on, when we hit view, I think we're looking pretty good. There's still some more stuff to do here to get mobile optimization, but other than that, we're looking pretty good. So going back to our presentation, there are a couple caveats to building a custom header this way. I already mentioned JavaScript. Some other issues that you might run into is obviously you are rebuilding something in a different environment. So there might be some repeated code, and additionally, if something were to change in the source that we were copying from, you would need to manually update it in your header as well. There's always going to be some differences. Most likely, it's hard to get an exact clone of something you're trying to copy from, but it's often sufficient to get close enough just to preserve that, as long as a user doesn't realize that they are leaving your ecosystem, your online presence is kind of the goal here. And like I mentioned earlier, there's still some more work to do in terms of mobile optimization. Continuing on from this, I've got some resources compiled that might be really useful if you want to go ahead and take a shot at building your own custom header. I've got the HTML and the CSS along with this public website available here for you to take a look at. Flexbox is a great way to learn how to style and position elements on a page correctly with CSS. It's super easy, and I highly recommend learning it. And CSS Tricks is also another great website. I didn't go over the Bootstrap grid system too deeply here, but Hub is fully Bootstrap compatible. We use Bootstrap 3. And so, if you want to use Bootstrap classes when building any kind of custom DOM elements, whether it be in a header or a text card or something, you can always use any kind of Bootstrap classes to apply the styles you want. I got my fonts from fonts.google.com. They have a huge repository of free fonts, but again, you might also have fonts within your own organization that you have access to. And then Area is another great thing just to keep in mind. It's always a good idea to develop with screen readers or accessible users in mind, just to make sure that your application is usable amongst the largest possible audience. And then one last thing that probably I should have talked about more during this presentation is, as I'm building DOM elements in a custom header, I always remember to use custom CSS classes to style and apply styles to my DOM elements. And the reason is, although it's unlikely, it's definitely possible to collide with some existing native Hub CSS that we might have in the application. But creating classes, like if I go into edit here, and I go to header, and I go to HTML, you can see I've got classes like Mashable header and Mashable item. These kind of classes, the chance that they'll collide with some other CSS class that might be in Hub or on your site are very, very low. So it's always a good idea to use custom CSS classes rather than trying to just scope CSS to elements using selectors, which is possible but not recommended. And so with that, that brings an end to my demo. I'll go ahead and hand it back over to Graham to talk about some further resources that are useful in terms of building out your Hub or enterprise site.
Thanks, Rob. So yeah, let's wrap up here with just a couple things you can take home. I get asked this a lot for enterprise sites and for Hub. Where can I go to see a lot of existing examples of great work? Now with enterprise, that's tricky because your networks aren't on the internet. But I can give you the good news, which is Hub has lots of online examples of great sites. So you can click hub.arcgis.com/pages/gallery and see a variety of different sites that are out there for you to check out. I don't really notice too much of a difference between an enterprise site design and a Hub design because they're both trying to get at that underlying idea of communicating GIS information to a non-GIS audience. So definitely use this as a site to get inspired. If you want to go spelunking a little more specifically, you can come in here and just search all sites across what's public in the world of SaaS software, so you can see all these different sites and use these as well. So that's one really great resource if you're looking for design inspiration. We also have a variety of Learn lessons and paths now available at learn.arcgis.com. They will walk you through some of this in more detail. I kind of flew through a lot of topics, and I know Rob went deep on one area, but there's a whole lot more to take a look at. And these links, if you're looking for more resources, we keep them in the overview in app right below the cards. So our documentation is always a great go-to, but we also have that examples gallery I just showed you. You can reach out to us on GeoNet. And if you're interested in driving the direction of both applications, please join our user lab. That's available at that link right there in your overview. Finally, if you want to hear about the direction of the product and get a monthly newsletter from us, sign up for our newsletter at that link. It will include kind of some of the changes to the app as well as some of the recent developments. So definitely recommend that if you're kind of interested in keeping tabs of what we're working on. Finally, Rob touched on a couple of accessibility best practices, but we've compiled this blog to really go deep on how to design your sites to get good scores when it comes to WCAG ratings and things like that. So check that out. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. We look forward to hearing from you. And thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Cheers.